Hey guys, welcome back. It is your favorite Gimp of the Limp, and I'm here with a special preview treat for you all today. I got a early copy of BattleFall that I have got to be playing with over the past few days, and I've got a review for you guys. It is getting ready to release tomorrow. As of the time of my filming this, I'm hoping to get this up later today, so you will be able to try it out for yourselves very soon. So, what is BattleFall? BattleFall States of Conflict actually is the full name of the game. BattleFall is a game that harks back to the golden days of old and the long, long ago in the before times, before the evil came, before the empire of EA, Activision, now Blizzard, and all the other companies that have pretty well ruined modern day gaming. Back in the olden days when we had good companies like Westwood and the others who produced excellent games like the Command and Conquer series, Command and Conquer, my personal favorite, the Tiberian Sun sequel. I know some people liked Red Alert. That wasn't my favorite, Red Alert 1 and 2. But back in those days when we had those very excellent real-time strategy games, BattleFall is really harking back to those old days. The game looks like it, plays like it. You could drag this game back 20 years ago and release it at that time frame, and people would expect it. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference, right? It really does feel like you took a game from that day and age and yanked it to now. Rather than GDI and NOD, though, we have our own factions here. We have the EFnet. You can think of them as more like GDI. These are the underground bunker people in this post-apocalyptic world. We have the Scrappers. They're more like the NOD people. The rebels, the savages, the upper worlders, who are fighting with whatever stuff they can get their hands on. And then we also have a third faction in this game called the Cell. This is the machines, the automations, kind of like if you took the Terminators and jammed them into Command and Conquer. That's what that faction is. So with this game, we have a campaign for each one of those different factions. You start with the EFnet, and then as you play through, you get to unlock the Scrapper and the Cell campaigns. And just like those games of old, you have the ability to do things like multiplayer and skirmish games. However, my copy, you don't have the ability to play as the Cell in the skirmish mode. It's only EFnet and the Scrappers that you could play as for skirmish. I don't know if Cell gets added in later or why they're missing. I looked, I couldn't find out. I'm hoping that that has to do with just this being a preview build of the game and that they're going to get added into it at the final release or maybe later on, but I can't say for sure for now. But you do have a campaign for each one of the different three factions and skirmish mode for the other two. So let's first talk about the graphics of the game. And when it comes to the graphics of this game, I'm not joking when I say that you really could have just yanked this game from 20 years ago when all those other games were being released. It looks like it could have been dragged right from that time frame. The pixelized look of everything. And in fact, I think it looks most like Tiberian Sun in its appearance because of the darker nature of the game. It is a post-apocalyptic setting and the neon glow, right? If you remember Tiberian Sun, it was supposed to be futuristic and a lot of the units had lasers or neon electric fences and all that type stuff. BattleFall has a very similar look to it that Tiberian Sun did. It's hard to describe, but it has a different feel when it comes to the darkness. Tiberian Sun was a dark game, and so is BattleFall, but BattleFall almost feels a little too dark in my opinion. I did notice when I was playing the game that I did have some issues with flickering blackness, especially around the edges of the game. And for me, I was able to rectify that by cutting off the dynamic lighting setting. And throughout my time playing with it, I was cutting it on, cutting it off. Sometimes I would notice that issue, sometimes I wouldn't. For the most part, I didn't, and I left it on for my later playthroughs of the game. and didn't notice any issues with it. So it might have been just an issue with an earlier build of the game. But if you do try the game and you do have a little bit of issues with the kind of black fluttering around the edges, that might be associated with your settings. Make sure you update your graphics drivers. And then if it doesn't work, you can always cut off that dynamic lighting setting and it should rectify the issue. The rest of the graphics, I do like. I gotta say, I love that pixelized look. It really does just give me that nostalgic feeling of those days of old, of just moving hundreds of infantry units across the board and different tank units and aerial units and all the different vehicles and everything. And especially as the little infantry guys, they're represented by what, like a handful of pixels, and you see those things burst into flames, as they get hit by lasers and missiles and tank cannon fire. This game's graphics really do just align with those old looks. It has that pixelized look. They've leaned hard into that. And I gotta say, I like it. I think it really does work for those of us who are nostalgic for those old games that we used to play. Speaking of the infantry, though, bursting into flames and everything, that brings me into the sound of the game. And there's good and bad when it comes to the sound of the game. For the most part, good, but there are a few points I didn't like. I would like to have seen a little more punchiness when it came to like the dying infantry units. We all remember moving infantry along and they'd get hit by a Tesla tower. That loud scream they would all make. And in this game, it feels a little more muted. You don't have as many screams. And I know it sounds kind of morbid to say it that way, but exploding units and dying infantry units is something that just goes along with games like this. And I would have liked to have heard just a little bit more coming from them as the combat was waging back and forth. Also, when the units were firing heavier weapons, things like tanks and missiles that were going back and forth, it leaned a little too hard into the whoosh and not enough into the boom. You hear a whole lot of whoosh, 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 whoosh as units are exchanging the fire, but it doesn't have as much boom behind it as I would have liked. So I'd like to see them just adjust that a little bit. More explosion, less whoosh when it comes to the exchange of fire.
Upgrade deployed. Sir. Been promoted.
The rest of the fire works great. The small arms and machine guns rattling off all sound great. But where the sound really works in this game is the soundtrack. And soundtracks aren't something that I usually worry too much about when it comes to games. I've never been a big soundtrack guy, but I gotta say, this soundtrack smacks. It hits. They really did find that rock and roll mix that just works with the game. I like the soundtrack. It cranks up at the right moments when you've got heavy conflict going on or you're attacking into an enemy base. And we all remember those old soundtracks from, Red Alert, Tiberian Sun, that rock tune that we were playing with the game. And BattleFall really did find the right soundtrack to fit in for that nostalgic effect. I can't compliment soundtrack enough. But the big thing is the gameplay itself. Is the gameplay good? And like I said, you could grab this game from 20 years ago and wouldn't be able to tell the difference. It's got everything that you would expect from a game like this. You've got your mobile construction yard that you can set up and you can build your base. And for the most part, it's pretty well free form. Build your base wherever you want to. You're going to build your camps, your tank production depots, especially the refineries. You build a refinery, it comes with a harvester. The harvester goes out and grabs the blue crystals. It's blue crystals instead of green crystals in this game. They're going to bring them back. That's going to give you money, and then you're going to spend that money buying different infantry units, different vehicle units. You can buy turrets to protect your base with. You also do have the ability to build walls in this game, but that comes with the turrets. I actually kind of like this. It makes it easier when you're building a perimeter to your base. When you align two turrets, it automatically puts walls in between those two turrets as you're building them. The only problem with that is sometimes your own units kind of get in the way and they'll block the spaces in between the turrets. I would have liked it if the units would automatically have gotten out of the way when you're trying to build those sections. It's not a huge deal, but sometimes you will find yourself trying to click on the individual infantry and like, get that move, get the hell out of the way. You're blocking my defense. Speaking of which, the pathfinding for the most part is okay with the game. That is something that can make or break a real time strategy game. And for this one, it works, but I did notice it seemed like some areas of the game had bigger hitboxes than you would expect. So, for example, if my units were marching up a road and there were trees lining the center of the road, it felt like those trees had a much larger footprint, a space blocked out for them that the infantry and vehicles wouldn't cross, and I would have my vehicles and infantry units marching up in like a single file line. So you couldn't always tell like exactly where the hitboxes were for the different pieces of terrain around the board. It felt like those terrain pieces extended out a little bit farther than they should have, especially past their physically what you could see on the map itself, which did cause some issues with pathfinding occasionally. There are some areas where it would get kind of tight when you would have an industrial area, buildings on each side of the road as you're trying to march your units through the area, and you find your units all kind of lining up because there's not a whole lot of places for it to march. Oh, I think that's only going to be a problem in maybe a few different areas because you're not always going to be fighting in a cityscape, but was something that was a little bit of a pain in the butt. But like I said, for the most part, pathfinding was great. Wherever I told the units to go, they would get there. They just didn't always get there exactly the way I thought they were going to get there. One of the things this game has that it does set itself apart with is the promotion system. And the promotion system is really just a bunch of different bonuses that you can get, upgrades or extra units that you could get for your different forces. So as you got promoted, there would be next to your build queue a little list of icons that you could click on, things that would give your units increased health or mobility, or even later on, you could get things like paradrops where you could drop in 8 infantry units wherever you're clicking on the map, or even $500 just bonus income. And you get a lot of promotions in this game. I found myself getting something like 20 promotions through the course of a scenario. It would just you're promoted, you're promoted, you're promoted, you're promoted, especially if you've got a large conflict going on, you're wiping out a bunch of enemy forces. So don't be afraid to use those bonuses. They're not really one-offs. They are really meant to be used. You can build up a huge amount of infantry forces if you keep calling in the paradrops, increase their health, increase their speed, their fire ability, all that stuff. And it really did kind of give you the extra punch, the extra weightiness you needed to be able to fight off the enemy forces, because I did find this game to be very heavy when it came to the losses. Like, units die quick, but it's a real-time strategy game. You expect units to die quick. Infantry aren't exactly supposed to withstand a rocket barrage. You're going to go through hundreds of infantry. That's fine. That's what the game's supposed to be. So ultimately, do I recommend Battlefield or not? And I gotta say, my best analogy would be the old Tremors movies. If you guys remember the underground monster movies with Kevin Bacon and Fred Ward. Love, especially the first 2 movies. So Tremors 1 was the AAA production movie that, was in theaters. It had Kevin Bacon in it, Reba McEntire, bigger stars, and it was a, proper horror movie. And Tremors 2 was like the B movie version of that. Both were good movies, but there was more production effort, more dollars spent on Tremors 1 than there was in Tremors 2, but it doesn't mean that both of them aren't good. And I would say that's the kind of difference you can expect here. If Command and Conquer, Tiberian Sun is, my favorite, so I use that as my example. If Tiberian Sun is the Tremors 1, then Battlefall is Tremors 2. they're both good, but you can tell the difference between the two. One is the one that's meant to be seen in theaters and it's had that polishing touches put on it. Whereas the other one, it's just a good weekend of fun. It's not one that you're going to regret watching, but it's not going to be an all time for the ages. And that's fine. Not every game has to be. You can see the differences pretty clearly in things like the mission briefings. Whereas in Command and Conquer, you would have the full motion video, voiced over actors in there, acting out everything. Whereas in Battlefall, it's a paragraph briefing across the board or across the screen that tells you what your mission is. And then afterwards, the debriefing is the same before you go on to your next mission. It's not that the second is bad, it's just the first is so much more polished. And there is that difference between the two. But gaming is open. There's a lot of games out there, and every game can't be a AAA. Some games are just a solid B movie, and that's what this game is. Battlefall is a solid B movie out of 10. But all right, that's going to be it for me. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. Y'all take care, and I will catch you in the next one.